Hi, this is Leslie, and today I'm talking about. Today I'm going to talk about the topic of plagiarism. Now, the reason for this topic is simple. Actually, academia has asked me to submit a letter to their, I think, new journal which they are starting. And initially, I wasn't going to do anything, but then later on, I had the thought, well, why not? And then I thought, well, what topic am I going to write about? And so that it occurred to me that perhaps a letter to the editor would be suitable about the topic of plagiarism. The reason being that actually this practice of plagiarism or taking other people's work and presenting it as one's own is unfortunately, how do I put this? It is known to occur in the academic circles, and that includes the Muslim academic circles. And as I have been working in the Islamic sector for 15 years, I have personally witnessed a number of cases of plagiarism, and I was in fact dismayed when I saw how some of the people who plagiarized in fact received promotions and became associate professors in these establishments of high learning. And I have also witnessed entire doctoral dissertations, which I know were plagiarized because I checked them using the Google search engine. As I say, I have also witnessed entire PhD dissertations being published as books, and the credit being given to the alleged author of the book. And I said to myself, I was thinking, this is not right. This cannot be right. I even remember a case of one doctor coming to my office with the first sentence to his next book, and I knew already for a fact that this person plagiarized his entire PhD thesis, and this thesis was being published by the university. And so then he popped into my office at one time at the Islamic University where I taught, and asked me to help him out with the very first sentence to his next book. Now, I looked at the sentence, and I can tell you the sentence made absolutely no sense. I struggled with that sentence for about 5 or 10 minutes with him in my office until finally I threw my hands in the air and I said, "Brother, I cannot help you with this. I just have no idea what you are trying to say. You better go back to the drawing board and start all over again." So he left. But the reason why he could not write the sentence, I think, is because he never learned how to write. And the reason why he never learned how to write was because he plagiarized most of his life. In other words, he took other people's work and presented it as his own. Now, you don't learn how to think when you do that. So it's clear, in other words, that the problem which we have in the Islamic or Muslim institutions of learning is to teach people how to think. In fact, I remember I reported I mentioned to my dean at the faculty where I was working at the Islamic University that the students tend to plagiarize their assignments, and he agreed with me. He knew that it was happening, and I think he must have sent word to the higher-ups at the university about my comment, or maybe about also the comments of other people, because I'm sure I was not the only one who noticed this trend towards plagiarizing. And I remember that on the very last day at the university, I saw a big sign on campus put up by the National Integrity Institute of Malaysia, and it said something to the effect, "Don't plagiarize, plagiarism is bad." And ironically, I also saw the one person, he was actually from a neighboring country. I don't need to identify the country, it's not necessary. But he was from a neighboring country, and I remember that this fellow was caught by another colleague of mine who was collecting papers to publish in the university journal. And when he put out the call for papers, this fellow, the one that I saw on my very last day at the university, he submitted a paper the very next day. And moreover, it was written in Arabic. And this fellow was not an Arab. So what happened was that my friend, who actually happened to be from an Arab country and whose language was native Arabic, came across a certain Arabic word in that text written by this other fellow that he himself could not understand. He said to me, he used this very rare Arabic word that even I didn't understand. So I had to look in a dictionary what it meant. So I was thinking, how can this fellow who is not an Arab know such a very rare Arabic word? So I checked his paper for plagiarism, and I discovered that it was indeed copied and pasted. He's put it this way: it was copied A to Z from a source on the internet. End of quote. So now, when I saw this fellow, walking in front, directly in front of that sign which said "Do not plagiarize," I remember that he had a very dejected look on his face, and he looked very and deeply ashamed. I suppose maybe he felt that the sign was trying to tell him something, and of course, indeed, it was. But now to come back to the topic of plagiarism. Why does that happen? As I mentioned earlier, I think it happens because people really don't have any opinion of their own to express. And one reason why people don't have an opinion to express, particularly the Muslims, is because many have been taught in the traditional way, and the traditional approach to education basically implies that we should not rely on our own opinions, especially when it comes to matters of religion. I even heard one colleague tell me one time at the university, when I said something to him about my opinion about a certain topic, he looked at me and he said, "Well, I think it's dangerous to have your own opinion," end of quote. Now, this fellow was a very nice fellow in every other respect, and he was a graduate of, I think, Medina University, and previously he worked at another university. But that statement was so surprising to me that at first I didn't know what to say. I never heard any such thing in my life. Later it crossed my mind that perhaps an appropriate answer would be, and I think perhaps I related to him later on, is that it could be just as dangerous or even more dangerous not to have your own opinion about certain matters, because when you give up your capacity and your ability to form your own opinion, you inevitably become a prisoner or a hostage to other people's opinions. Now, these other people may present themselves as experts to you, and you may follow them perhaps blindly and without thinking. Now, that could be very dangerous because, as we know, extremists operate in this manner, and they will say things to you that you must do this or you must do that, and they could easily manipulate a person into committing acts of extremism, thinking that they are doing the right thing and agreeing to it precisely because they are not using their reason. Now, this, I think, could be and is very dangerous. So how do we address this problem of plagiarism? I think what we need to do is we need to teach people how to think. For that, we need courses on reasoning, courses on how to make presentations, how to analyze a given topic, and yes, indeed, how to form your own opinion. Now, this does not mean that a paper that you may write will consist entirely of your own opinion. Not at all. In fact, I remember when I was studying political theory and political philosophy at the University of Toronto in Canada, we routinely did analyses of written text, and we were also expected to express our opinion, but only at the very end of the paper, and perhaps only in 5 or 6 sentences. A single paragraph or 2 would do it. So most of your paper would consist of the analysis of the text at hand. So that was a kind of exegesis of text. So we were taught to read the text very carefully, word by word, and be very careful in expressing any conclusions, and we were advised to make sure that these conclusions were accurate and as free of distortions as possible. So how to come back to this issue of plagiarism? I think there should also be some penalties for people who plagiarize. The universities should use plagiarism detection software such as Turnitin and others to check for plagiarism of all assignments, both student work as well as the contributions of academic staff. Any academic staff caught plagiarizing should be dealt with appropriately. We can leave that up to the university authorities as to what action they will take. But we need to remember that plagiarism in the academia is probably the single worst sin anyone can commit. It could be considered as a form of theft, and in fact some people do consider it as a form of theft. According to an article by Abdul Rashid Motem, which appeared in one of the journals of the International Islamic University of Malaysia, Jalaluddin al-Suyuti wrote a book which he called The Author and the Thief. That was about 500 years ago. And in that book he differentiated between bona fide authors who wrote their own text from those who copied and plagiarized other people's work. So the practice of plagiarism is nothing new, whether in the Islamic world or in the West. It happens all the time. Sometimes it goes undetected. So we have to make sure, if we want to have original research, that this practice is reduced to its minimum, and that there are consequences for people who actually stoop to it and participate in it. I remember one time I was giving a workshop on how to write a research paper at the same university, and I said at one point that we, the students, should avoid plagiarism because, and I referred to plagiarism as stealing. Now, one of the staff objected to it and raised his hand and said, no, it's not stealing, it is lifting. So I was thinking, oh, lifting, you mean as in shoplifting? So do you think there's a difference between shoplifting and stealing from a supermarket? Try to explain that to a judge. Of course, I didn't say this to the fellow, but these were some of the thoughts that came to my mind when I was thinking over his comment. So is there a difference between lifting and stealing? Well, let the viewer decide that for himself. What I do know is that writing a quality sentence is not easy. It may take years, even decades of training in learning how to think and then learning how to write. It's acknowledged among teachers of language that writing is probably the hardest skill to acquire out of the 4 skills of reading, listening, speaking and writing. So it takes years and years to develop, and yet you have people who simply take other people's text, present it as their own, and in this way they kind of use a shortcut to excellent language and to give themselves airs as educated people and even get promotions and monetary benefits. Now, I would say that if a society wants to have serious prospects of renewal, as the Muslim society does, then this practice should be reduced to a minimum as far as possible. So among the other steps that we can take to reduce the incidence of plagiarism is to have a code of ethics, to perhaps have a policy on plagiarism, because there is a number of institutions that do not even have a policy on how to deal with plagiarism and what it is. So the starting point for dealing with plagiarism has to be recognizing that yes, it is a problem, and secondly, yes, we have to do something about it. Only that way can the integrity of the research process be preserved, and only in that way can we ensure that the results of the research that we do are really original and have a serious chance of contributing to solving some of the problems that we as a global community and also as a Muslim community face in this contemporary world. So I think that's all for my video this time. If you have any comments or suggestions, please put them down in a space below, and I will attempt to answer them either in writing, replying to your comments, or perhaps by doing another follow-up video on this very important topic. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.